Disney's Hollywood Studios is one of the 4 theme parks at Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida, and features a theme centered around the golden age of Hollywood. It opened its gates in 1989 as MGM Studios. The name we know today didn't come until 2008 after they dropped all the MGM branding. Originally, the idea was that this would be half theme park and half working studio with a full functioning backlot. Obviously, that is no longer the case today. That all changed around 2014. Instead, what we have today is just a complete theme park with some really immersive lands, some fantastic rides, and great atmosphere. This is going to be my full in-depth review of the park based off of the many different experiences I've had here. I've seen the good, the bad, and certainly the ugly. So let's dive into what really works at this park. And hopefully if you're planning your first time visit that you'll find something in this video to be helpful. Now, right away, Disney's Hollywood Studios has really had an interesting history because the current version of this park is very far from that original concept. In my opinion, that is very much for the better. I think they had some neat ideas right when they got started, but I really like the direction they've taken this park in. It's not perfect and it still has a long ways to go, but I think it's all good steps in the right direction. I mean, more so than any other park at Walt Disney World, I feel like Disney's Hollywood Studios has a stacked ride lineup. This is the most exciting Disney park to visit. Over half of their rides have opened within the past 5 years, and all of them are of great quality. So, as a result, this park can get slammed. Expect high wait times here. If you're planning your first ever visit, do a full day, especially if you don't want to spend extra money on Lightning Lane. That's your skip the line system. Disney's Hollywood Studios is one of the top 10 most visited parks in the world. And despite there being many different experiences here, there's only 9 rides in the park. 3 in Toy Story, 3 with Star Wars, Mickey and Minnie's, and then 2 on Sunset Boulevard. So the ratio of long lines to short lines is very skewed. That's contrary to when you go to Magic Kingdom and there's just so much there that you'll get some really long lines, but others you can just walk on. Consistently, the only walk on here is typically Star Tours. And that's kind of for a reason. So unless you're paying for a bunch of lightning lanes, you're probably going to end up spending a good chunk of your day waiting in lines. Which sucks, but there's so much good stuff to do here that it ends up being worth it in my opinion, even if it isn't ideal. So let's walk through this layout and discuss each area section by section. Starting with, of course, the entry and how you get here. Now Disney, of course, makes this super easy. You can drive, you can take a bus from one of the resorts. If you're coming from Epcot or one of the hotels on the path of the Skyliner, you can just take a gondola straight to the front entrance. There's also a boat and some resorts that you can just walk from. You're that close. I've walked between Hollywood Studios and Epcot before. It's doable. Your front entrance is very old school, definitely plays up on that old Hollywood theme. It's actually very reminiscent to Disney's California Adventure, that front entrance. And right after you pass through your turnstiles, you're greeted with Hollywood Boulevard. But it's not modern day Hollywood Boulevard. You have one street that leads just straight down the center. On either side, you have buildings with some shops, cafes, tons of signage and little details, things that you'll pick up on every single time you visit. I've been coming here for years and there's still things that I notice. I like the old-timey vibe. It has its charm, although part of me can't help but wonder, is it a little outdated? Maybe. That's definitely a subjective question. I think some people will tell you yes, some people will tell you no. Honestly, it's the least of my concerns though with things that I would fix in this park. Depending on when you started coming here, you might remember that when you'd walk down Hollywood Boulevard, the view that you'd get would not be the Chinese theater. Instead, it'd be a massive Sorcerer Mickey hat. For a while, that was the icon of this park. It was eventually removed in 2015. I actually started coming here after that was taken out, so I've only ever known it where the Chinese theater is that view that you get, and I love it. I think it's a great centerpiece. It also holds one of the best attractions in the park, Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, an absolutely fantastic trackless dark ride. It opened as a replacement for the Great Movie Ride, which was an attraction I only ever did once. I know that ride certainly had its fans, but I think personally this is much better. I think the animation style is beautiful. It's so clever and creative. It's all over the place and doesn't make any sense story-wise, but it's a cartoon. Like, that's the point, right? You also can't help but admire the building it's in. This is an exact replica of the real Chinese theater in Hollywood. So much so that they even copied how many people are walking around in costumes. Although these are a lot less scary. One thing I love about Hollywood Studios is just how much live entertainment there is, and it comes in the form of things that you don't need to wait in line for, which, as I mentioned earlier, is definitely a plus. I feel like more so than any other Disney park, everywhere you go, you'll just see a character out walking about. Sure, you can stand in line for some meet and greets, but there's a good chance that you'll see a superhero, Chip and Dale, Donald or Daisy. In Toy Story Land and Galaxy's Edge especially, there's always someone walking around. It really helps sell the fact that this theme park is all about movies. You'll even notice as part of the landscaping, there'll be statues dedicated to different characters or filmmakers with their camera. It's a great premise for a theme park, but it does start to have a bit of an identity crisis later on when we move away from filmmaking to now you're just immersed in a movie. Like, it's enough that you can move past it and see the natural progression, but you can't help but think it's a little strange that you have a very immersive Toy Story Land and Galaxy's Edge, and then everything else is just completely unrelated, doesn't fit at all. I think Disney's California Adventure over at the Disneyland Resort kind of has a similar issue. You'll see that later on. But first, let's talk about Sunset Boulevard. So if Hollywood Boulevard is your main street, this is where you branch off into what was the first expansion of the park back in 1994. You got a really beautiful street here and the true icon of Hollywood Studios, the Hollywood Tower Hotel, aka Tower of Terror. It is so sick, so iconic, and a really fantastic ride. A perfect blend between dark ride and drop tower, and one of the rare rides at Walt Disney World that has a kind of spooky, like unsettling theme. I know there's one of those attractions that's like a rite of passage for kids. You gotta get over that initial fear so you can go ride Tower of Terror. But Tower of Terror is not the only attraction in this area. You'll find 2 shows back here. There's a Beauty and the Beast live on stage, pretty much just a basic retelling of the movie. In my opinion, if you're gonna skip anything at the park, this is probably one of the ones I'd recommend. Overall, I found it to be fairly forgettable. This is also where you have the entrance to your nighttime spectacular, Fantasmic. There's typically 2 showtimes a night here. I always recommend the one that takes place after park close so you can better maximize your time in the park. So let's say the park closes at 9, you can go to the 9:30 showing so you can finish up your last rides. This theater is huge, so if you're not too picky about where you sit, you don't need to get there that far in advance. Fantasmic overall is definitely one of those must-sees. I mean, it's very iconic, and I know there's a lot of nostalgia for this show. It has a lot of great moments that make seeing this absolutely worth it, but unfortunately, a lot of the show does feel like filler. They have these water screens that rise up to mass transitions between the actors doing scene changes on stage. The best parts of the show are by far when you have the live actors. It's just unfortunate that I feel like I spend most of my time watching the show waiting for something to happen. I'd much rather have a shorter, tighter show than one that's long and drawn out. But moving on from Fantasmic, the other big attraction that you gotta do here on Sunset Boulevard is, of course, Rock and Roller Coaster. For a long time, this was the only roller coaster in the park. It's a completely indoor Vekoma launch coaster, the only roller coaster at Walt Disney World that goes upside down. This is absolutely one of those rides that I feel like modern day Disney would not build. I'm kind of amazed they went through with it at all. Like, this is old Vekoma we're talking about, so it's not the smoothest. But overall, they've done a good job taking care of it. Depending on when you went, your experience on Rock and Roller Coaster could be drastically different. I know as of when this video is being recorded, they recently did a huge refurb where now all of the signs are actually lit up and on. All of the onboard audio is properly functioning on the ride vehicles. There's 6 different song variations that you can have during your experience. Makes it very rewritable. And it's just cool seeing such an iconic band have their own roller coaster. They do a great job with it, and I love all the memes in the pre-show. Unfortunately though, right next to Rock and Roller Coaster is another show that I just would not recommend, especially if you're tight on time. There's a show in a small theater that is completely dedicated to Lightning McQueen, and it just feels quickly thrown together. Really sad that this is the Cars attraction that we get at Walt Disney World when Disneyland has frickin' Radiator Springs. Like, if you have a kid that really likes the franchise, I mean, sure, go for it, but I'd be surprised if anyone other than little kids enjoy this. That's it as far as attractions over on Sunset Boulevard. Much like Hollywood Boulevard though, I would recommend taking a look at all the different signs. A lot of details, things that you'll probably miss. One of my favorites is a nod towards the original Paradise Pier over at Disney's California Adventure. And if you pay attention, over by Rock and Roller Coaster, they're playing live versions of various rock bands. It's a really great atmosphere. In my opinion, this is definitely one of the best areas of the park. So that's what's to the right of Hollywood Boulevard. Let's do a loop around the park, continue up on the right-hand side. To the right of the Chinese Theater is the Star Wars launch bay. You're going to pass under this Disney's Hollywood Studios arch, and you're greeted with a whole lot of nothing. I mentioned how I have some big complaints with this park, and this is by far the biggest one. This area is completely irrelevant, and that's coming from a Star Wars fan. There's like no reason to go back here. I think there's a little dance party for some of the kids that you can do, but that's it. There used to be a Little Mermaid show in this area. That's been closed for years. The actual Star Wars aspect of Launch Bay is just quiet and desolate. Disney's Hollywood Studios was under construction for so long when they were adding in Toy Story Land and Galaxy's Edge, and now we're at a point where the park is complete. There's no construction, which means it is perfect time to bulldoze this land and start working on what's next. Especially at the rate of construction that they typically do. You start now, it'll be done in like, what, 5 years? And you could absolutely fit a good-sized themed land here. It's not a perfect rectangle, but we're approximately looking at 445 feet long by 360 feet wide. That's assuming we demolish the launch bay, the dance party, and the old theater. And then, of course, if Disney really wanted to, I'm sure they could also relocate some of those buildings backstage to create even more room. But just looking at this area, you know what we could fit here? all of Rookburg or all of Klugheim, both at Phantasialand. You know what else would fit in this area? All of Diagon Alley if you were to exclude the ride building for Gringotts. And the same goes for Super Nintendo World. Minus the Mario Kart show building, you could fit that whole land in here. One land that I think would be an absolutely perfect fit here is Zootopia.
Wait a minute. I love that idea.
We're just now seeing that open up at Shanghai Disney. I know at first people were talking about that for Animal Kingdom, but I disagree. I don't think that would work very well there. It wouldn't fit the vibe. If you brought that over here, I think it'd really look nice. The only downside is if they copied and pasted it from Shanghai, then that would be 3 trackless dark rides in one park, which might be a little excessive. So I don't know, something to think about. I'd also love to see maybe a version of Radiator Springs here. It wouldn't be able to be anywhere near as big, but I just feel like there's a lot of potential with what you could do with this land, and it'd be a huge improvement. Now, as you start making your way down towards the back of the park in Toy Story Land, you're first going to pass through what is really just a dead zone and kind of a transition area. A blank hallway with the back of some buildings advertising whatever new Disney content is on Disney+. So now we enter our first real immersive section. The idea with Toy Story Land is that you're stepping into Andy's backyard. So on the ground, there's giant footprints from where humans have been walking. You're shrunk down to the size of a toy. And they got real creative with this land. Tons of massive Tinker toys, various objects and things that we're all very familiar with. The 3 rides we have are Toy Story Mania, Slinky Dog Dash, and Alien Swirling Saucers. Slinky Dog Dash is especially creative because they designed it to look like a kid did it. Like it's a Slinky roller coaster instruction kit. It's advertised as a family ride, but it's definitely kid oriented. Don't expect any crazy forces or anything. I know we constantly make fun of the weak launch. Yes, it is pathetic, but it looks great in the land here. I especially love how it looks at night with that light package. And really just this whole park at night is a total vibe. I've seen them go all out with doing projection mapping on the Chinese Theater and Tower of Terror. That's especially prevalent during different holidays such as Christmas. You can see a lot of this footage was taken at Christmas time. This is one of those parks that especially gets dressed up for the holidays. But overall, I was really impressed with Toy Story Land. I realize that I'm not necessarily the target audience here, but I can fully recognize just how well done it all is. Even down to the bathrooms are extremely well themed. But let's move on into Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. As a Star Wars fan, I was so excited to experience this land. I first did it over at Disneyland, where they have almost an exact replica. There's so much detail everywhere. You could spend a lot of time just walking around, checking out all the shops, tons of great merch, and plenty Easter eggs. It's one of the things to do here, even if you're not going to buy anything. Some of these stores just have animatronics in them. They've incorporated all of this throughout the land. You can build your own droid, you can build your own lightsaber. They have a cantina-style bar, really lively in there. In my opinion, the best place to eat in the entire park is back here. That's Docking Bay 7, right next to the Millennium Falcon. This is such a great quick service food location because none of it is traditional or basic. It's all made to fit inside the land, so they had to get creative, and it's very filling. Typically, I share one platter with someone, and I'm good after that. I've had the opportunity to try all the different options here, and it's all delicious. I also highly recommend trying the blue and green milk here by this Imperial ship. That's one of the specialty items you can only get here in Galaxy's Edge. It's the equivalent of how the Wizarding World of Harry Potter has butterbeer. And more often than not, as you're drinking these, you'll see stormtroopers walking by, or maybe Kylo Ren doing a presentation, walking out of the ship. And the cast members here will have a lot of fun with guests. They have pre-recorded statements and lines that they'll say. They'll just walk up to you. And I do wish that we saw more walk-around characters in this land, especially since that was what was originally promised. Instead, that's what they ended up sending to the Galactic Star Cruiser, which of course is no longer around. I feel like this land would be a lot more lively if there were more characters in it. The ride next door is Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run. There's nothing quite like walking up to that Millennium Falcon for the first time. Its presence in this land is just so incredible. The ride itself is fun. It's very interactive. You and your crew of 5 others all fill up the Millennium Falcon. You have 2 pilots, 2 gunners, and 2 engineers. You're on a mission from Hondo Anaka to go get some containers of coaxium. Depending on how your pilots do, your experience is different every time. Piloting the Millennium Falcon is by far the best, but gunner isn't bad at all. I highly recommend manual mode if you get the chance. Then you can at least shoot whether you go top, middle, or bottom, as opposed to automatic where you aren't even aiming and it's just shooting wherever. This is one of those attractions that if you don't mind what position you're at, there is a single rider line. Really shaves off a lot of the wait time, but you're almost guaranteed every time to be engineer. That's the only downside. But as much fun as Smuggler's Run is, this is definitely the weaker of the 2 attractions. Rise of the Resistance is the highly immersive, trackless dark ride experience. Multiple layers here with more than one pre-show. You fly off with the Resistance to their secret base on Pikara. You're attacked by the First Order, brought on board a Star Destroyer, brought into interrogation by the First Order, and then you escape back to Batuu. It is objectively the best dark ride of all time. The entire experience from start to finish is about 20 minutes long. It was so ambitious, there's just nothing else like it. The one downside is, because there are so many layers to it, something is always broken. The only guarantee with Rise of the Resistance is that not all of it is going to be functioning. And it's like you're rolling a dice, what it's going to be every time. Will all the animatronics work, or will we get B mode, like right here? Will the lightsaber come down every time? Maybe. What about those cannons? Well, those stopped moving a long time ago. Or see these guns on the AT-AT? Yeah, those don't lower anymore. It's just kind of disappointing because if you rode this right after it opened, it was in flawless condition. Everything was working. All the cast members were giving it their all. Those who were a part of the Resistance were excited to be there. Those in the First Order were totally in character. And you sometimes get that. Not saying it never happens, but it definitely varies. But even through all the problems or issues that have come up with the experience, it's still the best ride here, and you can make an argument for being the best ride at the resort. If you can get past the long line it usually gets, this is one you'll want to do more than once for sure. So let's go ahead and make our way out of Galaxy's Edge and enter the land of the Muppets. Here you have a fun 4D theater called Muppet Vision, a pizza place called Pizza Rizzo, there's a full sit-down Italian restaurant hidden back there, actually really good food, and overall, it's a fine looking area. To be honest, right up there with Star Wars Launch Bay, this is one of my least visited parts of this park. It's an area I always just walk past to get into Galaxy's Edge. I know Muppet Vision has its fans, and certainly it's one of the nice things to go and do, sit in an air-conditioned theater when it's hot out and you've been walking around all day. But I feel like in the long run, when it comes to Hollywood Studios, this is one of the more forgotten areas. As people list their favorite things to see and do at Hollywood Studios, no one really talks about Muppet Vision. When you look long term, I feel like this is definitely one of the areas that will eventually go. Especially when you factor in that if you were to combine this land with the land that Star Tours sits on, you got a pretty good sizable chunk there for another large theme park land. You'd be looking at an area about 460 feet long by 370 feet wide. Everything I previously mentioned for Star Wars Launch Bay could also fit in this area, and more. Now, this should definitely not be as high of a priority as the land that Star Wars Launch Bay sits on, but I think if they wanted to continue to improve this park, putting something else here would just make sense. Even if you were to just further expand Galaxy's Edge into this area, I don't think too many people would complain. You want a Star Wars roller coaster? I mean, sure, why not, right? As of right now, Star Tours is very out of place. It's an old, outdated system that's kind of irrelevant now that you have Smuggler's Run. The only advantage is kind of what I mentioned earlier. It's nice that you can almost guarantee it's a walk-on, and it's rewritable because it's a different sequence every time. So I like that. But it's weird, right? Having a Star Wars ride outside of the Star Wars land? It just doesn't fit. It doesn't make any sense. I think there's a lot of possibilities here, and I look forward to seeing what happens in the future. Also nearby is a fun drive-in theater called Sci-Fi Dine-In. There you can sit in an old car and watch movies as you eat your food. I have yet to actually do this, but I've seen it. It looks really cool. Supposedly the food there isn't that great, or at least according to what I've heard. You primarily go for the atmosphere. But if you were to continue down that pathway, you also see the ABC commissary. Definitely some decent variety there. I'd much sooner recommend eating there than the nearby Backlot Express, which is right next to Star Tours. That, in my opinion, is the worst food in the park. From my experience, it is extremely plain, basic, and not good. But I guess if all you eat is chicken tenders and you don't really care about food with actual flavor, then, I mean, go for it.
Hey, wait a minute. We can
Eat this food.
here like this?
We can't?
No.
Well, guys, what do you expect me to do?
Just not eat there?
Yeah.
Now, right next door to Backlot is the Indiana Jones Stuntacular. In my opinion, this is the best show in the park. They took the filmmaking approach to Indiana Jones. So you see some of the key moments from the movie, but then they show you like how they do them. After that first opening scene with the boulder, they're like physically removing the set pieces out in front of you while you have some of the filmmakers talk about the actual process, and then they'll show you like some of the stunts, actually play through an action scene. It's really cool and creative. I love the premise, and it's extremely well done. But I mean, after that, there's not a whole lot else left. There's a Frozen sing-along at the Hyperion Theater. There's a restaurant out on Echo Lake that's set up to look like a boat. Some more shops and cafes, and that's what eventually brings you back onto Hollywood Boulevard. And that's Disney's Hollywood Studios. So as you've hopefully been able to tell, Hollywood Studios has a lot of great stuff going for it. They have a very strong attraction lineup. Interestingly, almost all of which is indoors. Technically, Slinky Dog Dash is the only non-covered attraction here in the park, which is great because Florida gets super hot in the summer and rains literally every single day. So you definitely appreciate that. One thing I definitely appreciate more of in this park though is some shade. There is not a lot of shade in Hollywood Studios, and it is bad. All of these pathways are just wide open. If it starts pouring on you, you are totally exposed. I doubt it's something that's going to get fixed anytime soon, but at least be aware of it. So in conclusion, I think it's really cool to see how far Hollywood Studios has come. My first ever visit to this park was literally when it was half a theme park. They were really trying to figure out its identity and what it was to become. It's gotten a lot better since then, but I really hope that those Disney Imagineers start thinking up other ways to improve the park for the future. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, and maybe in 20 years when they finally finish it, we'll be able to do an updated video to talk about it. But let me know down in the comments below, what do you think of Disney's Hollywood Studios at the Walt Disney World Resort? If you agree with the points that I brought up, if you think there's anything I missed, let me know down below. And if you're new to Coaster Studios, I would love if you could subscribe. We do theme park and roller coaster reviews from places all across the world, so be sure to go check those out. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.